If you are over 65 and you have noticed that getting through the morning feels harder than it used to, that the tiredness does not go away no matter how much you sleep, that your legs feel heavy before you have even left the house, I want you to keep watching, because there is a very good chance the problem is not your age at all. It might be sitting on your breakfast plate right now, or, more accurately, it might be missing from it. Every single day, millions of people over 65 wake up exhausted, blame it on getting older, and go about their day dragging themselves through it. And in a huge number of those cases, the real cause is a single vitamin that the body simply cannot absorb the way it used to. That vitamin is B12, and today I am going to show you exactly which 3 foods to put on your breakfast plate to start turning that fatigue around, starting as soon as tomorrow morning. Before we get into the list, tell me in the comments how you have been feeling in the mornings lately. Tired, foggy, fine, or somewhere in between. I want to know who is watching this so I know what to cover next. I think of a woman I know who spent almost 2 years assuming her mornings would just always feel like wading through wet sand, slow, heavy, unmotivated, and she had genuinely made peace with it as the price of getting older. It was not until a routine blood test flagged her B12 as low that anyone even mentioned the word to her. Within about 6 weeks of changing very little else besides her breakfast and adding a supplement her doctor recommended, she described it as feeling like someone had quietly turned the lights back on. Nothing dramatic happened. No new medication, no major lifestyle overhaul. Just a vitamin that had been running low for longer than anyone realized. Stories like that are far more common than most people think, and that is exactly why this list matters. Now let's talk about why this happens in the first place, because understanding the why is what makes the what actually stick. Vitamin B12 is not something your body makes on its own. It comes entirely from food, and it plays a role in almost everything that keeps you feeling alive and alert. It helps your body make red blood cells, the ones that carry oxygen to every muscle and organ you have. It helps your nerves send signals properly, the kind of signals that keep your balance steady and your thinking clear. And it plays a direct role in how your body converts food into usable energy. When B12 runs low, all 3 of those systems slow down at once, and the result feels exactly like what so many people write off as just getting older. Heavy legs, a brain that will not quite wake up, a kind of tiredness that a nap does not fix. Here is the part that almost nobody explains clearly enough. It is not just about how much B12 you eat. It is about how much of it your body can actually pull out of that food and use. And this is where age changes everything. To absorb B12 from food, your stomach needs to produce enough acid to release it, and then a substance called intrinsic factor has to carry it through into your bloodstream. As we get older, stomach acid production naturally declines for a lot of people, sometimes gradually over decades, sometimes more noticeably after 60 or 65. Less acid means less B12 gets pulled free from your food, even if you are eating plenty of it. Add to that the fact that many older adults take medications that reduce stomach acid even further for heartburn or reflux, and you have a recipe where someone can be eating what looks like a perfectly balanced diet and still be running low on one of the most important vitamins their body needs. This is not rare. It is estimated that a meaningful share of adults over 60 have suboptimal B12 levels, without ever being told, because the symptoms get mistaken for normal aging instead of what they actually are, a fixable deficiency. Think of it like a lock and key that has slowly gotten a little rusty. The key, meaning the B12 in your food, has not gone anywhere. It is still right there on your plate. But the lock, meaning the stomach acid and the process that pulls that B12 free, has gotten stiffer with age and does not turn as smoothly as it used to. You can have a plate full of keys and still not get through the door if the lock itself needs attention. And that is exactly the situation a lot of people over 65 find themselves in without ever knowing it. And that is exactly why what you eat at breakfast matters so much. Because breakfast is the one meal most people actually eat consistently every single day, and it is the easiest place to build a habit that keeps this vitamin topped up without having to think about it constantly. So let's get into the 3 foods, starting with the one that is the easiest to add and works its way up to the one I consider the single best food for this on the entire breakfast table. Food number 1 is eggs, specifically the whole egg, yolk included. A lot of people spent years being told to avoid egg yolks because of cholesterol concerns, and because of that, an entire generation started eating egg whites only. which quietly threw away almost all of the B12 in the egg. The yolk is where nearly all of it lives. 2 whole eggs provide a solid, meaningful amount of B12, along with choline, a nutrient that works alongside B12 to support memory and brain signaling, which makes eggs a kind of 2-for-1 when it comes to feeling sharp in the morning. Eggs are also about as easy as breakfast gets. Scrambled, boiled, poached, folded into a simple omelet with some vegetables, it takes minutes, and it fits into almost any routine, whether you are cooking for yourself or for a whole family. If cholesterol is a concern for you personally, that is a conversation worth having with your doctor. But for most people, whole eggs a few times a week as part of a balanced diet are considered perfectly reasonable, and the B12 benefit is one of the strongest arguments for keeping the yolk on the plate instead of scraping it into the sink. There is also a small trick worth knowing here. Eggs cooked with a little more moisture, like soft scrambled or poached, rather than hard fried, tend to be gentler on digestion, which matters if you are someone whose appetite in the morning is not what it once was. Pairing 2 eggs with a slice of whole grain toast and a few slices of tomato turns this into a full breakfast in under 10 minutes. No special ingredients required, no complicated preparation, just a small shift in what already sits in most refrigerators. That is food number 1, and if you are already someone who skips the yolk, that alone might be worth changing starting tomorrow. Now here is a question worth sitting with for a second. What if the food richest in B12 on this entire list is something most people have never thought to put on a breakfast plate at all? Food number 2 is going to surprise some of you, because it is not something typically associated with mornings. And that is exactly why so many people miss out on it. Food number 2 is plain yogurt, particularly Greek yogurt, and the reason it deserves a spot here is that dairy in general is one of the more reliably absorbed sources of B12 there is. Unlike some plant-based sources that people mistakenly believe contain B12, dairy delivers it in a form the body recognizes and processes well, even in someone whose stomach acid production has slowed down with age. A serving of plain Greek yogurt at breakfast, topped with a few berries and a small handful of nuts, gives you B12 alongside protein that helps you feel fuller and steadier through the morning instead of hitting a slump by 10 o'clock. The protein matters here too, because pairing B12-rich foods with protein at breakfast has been associated with more stable energy levels throughout the day compared to a breakfast that is mostly refined carbohydrates. If you are someone who currently starts the day with just toast or cereal and coffee, swapping in a bowl of yogurt even 3 or 4 mornings a week is a small change that adds up. Choose plain over flavored where you can, since flavored yogurts are often loaded with added sugar that can cause its own energy crash later in the morning, working against the very thing you are trying to fix. If you struggle with dairy in general, a lactose-free yogurt gives you the same B12 benefit without the discomfort, so that is worth a look before writing off dairy entirely. That is food number 2, quiet, easy to overlook, and genuinely one of the better absorbed sources available. Quick pause here. If this is starting to make sense of some tiredness you or someone in your family has been living with, tap that like button. It costs you nothing, and it helps this reach the people who need to hear it. And while you are there, tell me, is breakfast usually the meal you skip or the one you actually make time for? I read every comment, and it tells me exactly what to cover next. But food number 3 is the one I want you to pay the closest attention to, because if I had to pick a single food to recommend to someone over 65 who is dealing with low energy, this would be it. Food number 3 is fortified breakfast cereal, and I know that might sound almost too simple after everything we just talked about, but stay with me, because the reason matters. Here is the detail that changes everything. The B12 that occurs naturally in animal foods like eggs, meat, and dairy is bound to protein, and your body has to use stomach acid to unbind it before it can be absorbed. That is the exact step that becomes less efficient as we age. Fortified foods are different. The B12 added to fortified cereals is what is called a free or crystalline form, meaning it is not bound to protein at all. It does not require stomach acid to be released the way natural food sources do, which means it can be absorbed efficiently even in someone whose stomach acid production has declined significantly with age. This is actually why many doctors specifically recommend fortified foods or supplements for older adults rather than relying on food sources alone, because the absorption pathway sidesteps the exact bottleneck that age creates. A bowl of a whole grain fortified cereal at breakfast, checked for one that lists B12 clearly on the nutrition label, can provide a substantial portion of what your body needs for the entire day, absorbed easily, no matter what is happening with your stomach acid. Pair it with milk, which adds its own contribution of B12 on top, and you have built a breakfast that directly targets the exact mechanism that causes B12 levels to drop with age, instead of just adding more B12 to a system that cannot pull it out of food efficiently in the first place. That is why this one sits at number 1. It is not about eating more B12. It is about eating the form of B12 your body can actually use without a fight. If cereal is not really your thing, or you follow a vegetarian or plant-based diet where eggs and dairy are limited or off the table entirely, the same principle applies to fortified plant milks and nutritional yeast, both of which use that same free, crystalline form of B12 that does not depend on stomach acid to be absorbed. A spoonful of nutritional yeast stirred into scrambled eggs or sprinkled over avocado toast adds a savory, slightly cheesy flavor while quietly doing the same job as the fortified cereal. The exact food matters less than the form the B12 comes in, and that is the single most useful thing to remember out of this entire list. Now, here is something worth thinking about for a moment. None of these 3 foods require a special trip to a health food store, an expensive supplement, or a complicated new routine. Eggs, yogurt, and a fortified cereal are things sitting in most grocery stores already, often in the same aisle you walk past every single week. The barrier was never access. It was simply not knowing which foods actually matter, and why the ones that matter for you at 65 are not necessarily the same ones that mattered at 35. A few practical things worth keeping in mind as you start making these changes. Spacing matters a little more than people realize. Your body absorbs B12 more efficiently when it is not competing with very large amounts of food all at once, so a moderate breakfast that includes 1 or 2 of these foods tends to work better than trying to cram all 3 into a single sitting out of enthusiasm. Consistency matters more than intensity. Eating one of these foods every single morning for a month will do far more for your energy than eating all 3 once and going back to your old routine the next day. And if you are on any medication that reduces stomach acid, including some very common heartburn medications, that is worth mentioning to your doctor specifically in the context of B12, since it may mean food sources alone are not quite enough, and a supplement could be worth discussing. This is not something to diagnose yourself or adjust your medications over. It is something to bring up as a specific, informed question at your next appointment, which tends to get a much more useful answer than a general complaint about feeling tired. If you try adding these foods in and a few weeks go by with no real change in how you feel, that is meaningful information too, and it is worth a simple blood test since checking B12 levels is quick, inexpensive, and can rule the whole thing in or out clearly instead of guessing. It is also worth knowing that B12 levels alone do not always tell the whole story, and in some cases a doctor may look at a related marker as well to get a fuller picture, which is exactly why this is a conversation for a professional rather than something to self-diagnose from a video, no matter how clearly it is explained. Another small thing worth mentioning, coffee and tea taken right alongside a B12-rich breakfast are generally fine for most people, but if you take a B12 supplement specifically, taking it a little apart from your morning coffee can make a small difference for some people, simply because caffeine can slightly affect absorption timing. None of this needs to become a rigid ritual. The goal is a handful of simple, repeatable habits, not a strict regimen that becomes one more thing to manage. I want to leave you with this. So much of what gets written off as an inevitable part of getting older turns out, on closer look, to be something ordinary and fixable, sitting quietly in a routine nobody thought to question. Low energy after 65 does not have to be something you simply accept and work around for the rest of your life. Sometimes the fix really is as unglamorous as what ends up on your plate at 7 in the morning. There is a real difference between accepting that your body has changed with age, which it has, and assuming that every change is permanent and untouchable, which it usually is not. The version of yourself that used to have energy to spare did not disappear. In a lot of cases, that person is still in there, just quietly underfed in one specific, fixable way. If this helped you see your own breakfast a little differently, take a second and tap that like button. It genuinely helps this reach more people who are dealing with the exact same tiredness and assuming there is nothing to be done about it. And down in the comments, I would love to know, which of these 3 are you already eating, and which one are you going to add this week? Tell me that, and tell me how you have been feeling in the mornings. because I read every single comment and it shapes exactly what I cover next. If you found this useful, there is another piece of this puzzle worth knowing about, because energy is only half the story. There is a second, quieter sign the body gives off long before energy crashes even begin, and almost nobody knows to look for it. That is exactly what I am covering in the next video, so I will see you there.